I was getting instruction on how to hold the microphone. So hopefully I hold it correctly. And I get a little bit uncomfortable when I have a platform this far away from you. So I may come a little bit closer to speak to you today. It's a joy to be here. Happy Valentine's Day weekend to you. I was so excited yesterday. I was driving back from Oklahoma City and got back early enough to go pick up some flowers, an assortment of flowers for my wife, and I was going to go into the house and we were going to have dinner together, and I was going to give her all these flowers. And so I show up at Whole Foods over at 41st, and that's where I normally go to get my assortment of flowers. And I go into Whole Foods, and I'm all excited about getting in. I walk into that area, and guess who's standing there? Marlene, my wife. So I said, hey, pick out whatever you want.
There you go.
And bring it on home when you come home. It didn't work as well as I thought it might, but it's been that kind of, last year my daughter McKenna went to OU. She graduated from Cashel Hall here in town May of last year, and then was accepted at Oklahoma University. She's actually cheering at Oklahoma University, so she's going to be traveling with the basketball team, hopefully if they make the NCAA tournament, to cheer for them. But she's had a great first semester, and I heard all these stories about how kiddos go away for college and they don't write, they don't text, and they don't obviously send mail. That's kind of really old school, right? So, and they don't call, but McKenna has quite often because she needs money. And so that's going well. But I read with interest last fall as I was hearing all these stories about a young lady who didn't do that. She had not written, she had not texted, she had not emailed, she had not done any of those things. And it was getting toward the end of the first year, and she wrote a little note to her dad, actually through the mail, and said, "Dear Dad, things are going pretty well here. The dorm did burn down, and I did lose all my personal effects and my textbooks, but I found a new place off campus to live with a new roommate, Jim. And Jim's doing really, really well. He's been in recovery for almost 6 months now. And I know that we have not communicated by email. I haven't by email or text, so I fully understand why you didn't make it to the wedding between Jim and I, but I know that you'll not miss the impending birth of your new grandchild." She signed it sincerely, puts her name down, and says, "P.S. Dad, all the above is not true. I did flunk chemistry. I just wanted you to keep things in perspective." And I think at times when we talk about issues of federalism and these issues that you guys are talking about today, this is a growth and opportunity summit. It's a little bit out of course to have an attorney speaking to you about growth and opportunity. Generally, that's what? A governor and policymakers, and you've got plenty of that, and you're blessed in that regard to hear from folks in that as far as what we should be considering in education and tax policy and the rest. But I would say to you that what I'm going to visit with you today about is as important to growth and opportunity is any other policy consideration, any other idea, any other proposed piece of legislation that you'll talk about. That's part of the big statement. But hear me out as I start today by saying this to you. When you have a disrespect for rule of law, when you have a president who says in the State of the Union, "I've got a pen and I've got a thumb," sending a message to the Congress that whatever it takes to achieve the policy end that I have, I'm going to do. I'm going to bypass Congress and instruct Kathy Sebelius at Health and Human Services. Or I'm going to bypass Congress and instruct Gina McCarthy at EPA on Clean Air and Clean Water Act issues. I'm going to bypass Congress and I'm going to instruct the IRS to do this or that. That is problematic. It's even more problematic, as we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about with you, when you have a president who says, "I'm going to change a statute. I'm going to change what the statute says." I see Adam Dobersvike here. He heads the Federalist Society here in Tulsa, a good friend. It is a very troubling thing for a president of the United States to take a statute that's been adopted by Congress that has mandatory deadlines, statutory guidelines, statutory language that says shall, mandatory, these things shall occur. And for the president to say, "I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to change that," through an executive order, that is a disruption of rule of law like we've never seen in this country before. And it's a problem. And it's a problem because as a business owner, think about this just for a second. If you own the hospital, or you're a physician, or you're an insurance company, and you have spent the last, or in the healthcare arena at all, and the Affordable Care Act touches you, think about the last 18 months. You've been making plans to try to do what? Conform your business to comply with the law that was passed by Congress. That's what the benefit of rule of law is, in the sense that it gives you confidence that I'm going to what? I know what the law is. I'm going to make investment, capital investment. I'm going to retain employees. I'm going to make adjustments to my business plan to comply with what Congress has passed. And so for the last 18 or so months, that's been happening for the president unilaterally to come in and say, well, you really didn't mean that. They may have meant it, but I'm going to change that. And I'm going to sign an executive order to change the rules midstream. How do you plan now as a business owner? How do you invest your capital to grow your business with that type of attitude in Washington, D.C.? If you're an energy company and you look at the Clean Air Act and you see plainly written in the Clean Air Act what the rules and requirements are of you as an energy company, that you have the EPA director, Gina McCarthy, changing that midstream, how are you to deploy capital? How are you to retain employees and do your job and grow your business when those things can change unilaterally at a moment's notice? That's why rule of law matters. So when we talk about growth and opportunity does not happen because government creates jobs. Government doesn't create jobs. Private sector, businesses create jobs. The best thing that government can do to benefit jobs is to get out of the way. And we have a situation in this country, not only where the government is not getting out of the way, it's asserting itself more than it ever has before. We have a regulatory state, we have a fourth branch of government in this country that is substantial, that is onerous. And when you come out and say we're over-regulated, we talk about being overtaxed, and we are in many instances. But let me say to you unequivocally, we are over-regulated. We have businesses constrained to the point that they cannot even do what they are wanting to do, to invest capital to grow. And then you have the audacity of these congressmen and the president saying, but we're here to create jobs. Right. The best thing you can do to create jobs is to what? Approve the Keystone Pipeline. The best thing you can do to create jobs as the president of Congress is to make sure the EPA is not being onerous upon energy companies in this country. That's the best thing you can do to create jobs, but it's not happening. So it may seem somewhat counterintuitive for the Attorney General or an attorney to be with you today to talk about growth and opportunity, but I hope you understand, as I've talked about rule of law, how important it is to growth and opportunity. And there are 2 or 3 cases that I'm going to chat with you about. We've got several. I get asked often, as whether I'm in D.C. speaking at Heritage or what have you, they think, these individuals sometimes who see our lawsuits, they think we're just sitting in our office, can't wait to file a lawsuit. There are so many opportunities for us to sue this federal government. We have to prioritize. We don't have enough attorneys in my office to challenge the federal government at every turn. We're doing the best we can. As was mentioned by the representative, we actually have the first state in the country that set up a federalism unit was the state of Oklahoma. I told you in 2010 we were going to pay attention to executive orders, we were going to track regulatory action, we were going to track agency action, we were going to compare it to the statutes, and if the agencies overstepped their bounds, we were going to step into the void and do something about it. And in 2010, one of the very first things I did was create a federalism unit. I hired a solicitor general. Oklahoma didn't have a solicitor general. That's a fancy term for a person who focuses on federal litigation and appellate advocacy. To go to the 10th Circuit, to go to the Supreme Court. We went out and hired an individual and added 3 attorneys. We have 4 attorneys now that most of what they do is wake up each day looking at what this administration is doing in Washington, D.C. and saying, we're going to challenge you to make sure that you don't overstep your bounds. That's Oklahoma, and we're setting the road. And now we see other states following that, and it's making a difference. Just a few cases that I'll talk to you about. I think the most prominent and I think impactful cases. I'll start with the Affordable Care Act. I can't tell you how many times I heard it yesterday in an interview. I was doing an interview with some folks out of state, and the question was, well, wasn't this resolved in June of 2012? I mean, we had a Supreme Court case, and just to give you a little background, you know what happened in 2010 when the Affordable Care Act was passed. In March of that year, My friend Ken Cuccinelli in Virginia was the first one to challenge the Affordable Care Act. Just hours after it was passed, Ken was ready. And then Florida followed after that, and eventually you had 26 states combined with Florida. You had Virginia, which made 27. I was elected as your Attorney General in November of 2010. I told you then it was not whether we were going to challenge the Affordable Care Act, it was how. And so in January of 2011, I had a decision to make. Do I join Florida on behalf of Oklahoma, or do we file separately in our state? Now, at the time, I felt very strongly because you and I passed a constitutional amendment in November of 2010 to our Constitution that said what? No government can mandate the purchase of health insurance. And I thought it was right to defend the Oklahoma Constitution before an Oklahoma judge in Muskogee, Oklahoma. So we filed it in Oklahoma to defend our Constitution against what was going on with the ACA, making it 28 states. So 28 states as of January 2011. Well, as you know, the Florida case made it up to the Supreme Court before Virginia, and obviously before Oklahoma because it was ahead. So when the case made it up to the Supreme Court, the judge in Muskogee, Judge White, said, we're going to stay the Oklahoma case, we're going to put it in dormancy until we find out what happens in the NFIB versus Sebelius case. I was there in March of 2012 when the case was argued. I sat front row watching history being made. I was there in June of 2012 when the case was handed down. And after the case was handed down, I want you to hear there was one decision, largely, that was made in that lawsuit. It was the only issue was whether the statute was constitutional. And as you know, the court at that time said that the law was constitutional. But what was not settled in June of 2012 is whether these agencies that are implementing the law are doing so consistent with the statute as passed by Congress. I'm going to say it a little bit slower because it's important. It was not resolved in 2012 whether the IRS is conforming its actions to the statute. It was not resolved in June 2012 whether the HHS is issuing rules and regulations consistent with what Congress said. The contraceptive mandate case with Hobby Lobby, which we're involved in as a state, supporting as a friend of the court, a brief. And thank God for David Green. Thank God for someone that's leading a company that's willing to say, I'm going to stand for what I believe. In that case, this is an aside with the Hobby Lobby case. Think about what the government is saying in that case. Just think about it for a moment. They're saying that the government has the power to coerce David Green to spend money on something that violates his freedom of conscience and his freedom of religion. That is a fundamental tenet of our Constitution. That this Justice Department, Eric Holder, and this President believe they got the authority to say when your action somehow isn't consistent with what the government wants you to do, they have the power to use the coercion of government to make you conform, even if it violates your First Amendment right to free exercise of religion. How extraordinary. You know this. The Supreme Court has already said that corporations can possess free speech rights. That was Citizens United. This Supreme Court has said corporations, which are considered persons under the law, can possess First Amendment rights, free speech. Why is it so far afield to think that they can't possess free exercise rights? It's not. You're going to see lots of friends of the court. We're going to want to be there for the argument with Hobby Lobby. I'm hopeful that you will not see a 5-4 decision in favor of Hobby Lobby. I'm hopeful that you see a substantially majority opinion to send a message to this government and this Justice Department. You're wrong. The First Amendment means something in this country. You can't coerce people to conform their conduct to what you think is right. We need to support that and pray for that. But that case is an example of the implementation of the law. And what the HHS is doing it consistent with, in this instance, the First Amendment. So those issues were not resolved in June of 2012. Oklahoma was strategically placed to do something about the IRS. I can't tell you that in January of 2011 I expected or anticipated that the IRS would do something inconsistent with the statute. Now, we could have guessed that they would, but I couldn't tell you for sure that they would. Now we see that they are. And so when that case came down, you know that under the law, the Affordable Care Act says that every state in the country had a decision to make on whether to set up a state exchange. You remember that discussion? In Oklahoma, you had, I think before Governor Fallin came into office, there was some effort being made by the healthcare authority, and I think there was some follow-up with her administration initially, that there was like roughly $54 million, is that right, Aaron? Roughly $54 million that was being appropriated, or a grant that was coming to Oklahoma to set up these exchanges. Thank goodness Oklahoma, Representative Rumbaugh, other representatives, senators, and the governor said, we're not going to do that. We've changed our mind. We're not going to set up a state exchange. And you know why? Because there are ongoing costs and there are ongoing responsibilities with that exchange that they knew would affect the state adversely. But they also knew something else. Because this is what the law says. If you don't set up a state exchange, then the penalties that are to be assessed under the Affordable Care Act for non-compliance, for not offering qualified health insurance by an employer, can't be assessed in our state. That's a big deal. Big deal. And let me unpack it for you a little bit. Congress did what they always did. Did what they always do with respect to the Affordable Care Act. They wanted the states to set up state exchanges. They needed the states to set up state exchanges. Now we know why. They're not good at it. And so they wanted the states to be involved in a patchwork, of 50 states out there partnering. And there was a couple of reasons, I think. One, politically, the president wanted to share what? Political pain with all the states, because they knew it was going to be a disruption, a substantial disruption. So they wanted states to be involved so they could say, well, the state did that. We didn't do that. And so there's a political objective, I think, with the president to encourage the creation of state exchanges. There was something else involved. Senator Nelson in Nebraska, of all people, when the Affordable Care Act was being passed, was very concerned that the federal exchanges were going to be a precursor to a single-payer system. And there was much concern, in fact, it's in the legislative record. George Will did an article recently, actually talking about our lawsuit about 2 weeks ago, and he called me about a month ago and said, Scott, can we talk about the lawsuit? And I said, sure, let's talk about the lawsuit. And he asked about the legislative history, and we gave him some legislative history. And there was tremendous concern about this single-payer system and the federal exchanges being used to accomplish that. And so you had a policy reason, for the feds wanting to see state exchanges with some members, and you saw a political reason because of the shared responsibility, and they appropriated billions of dollars. That $54 million was part of billions of dollars the federal government appropriated to set up state exchanges. They didn't appropriate $1 for the federal exchange. So they clearly anticipated that they clearly wanted states to set up state exchanges. So they did something that we need to make note of. They said, you know what, we want to encourage and incentivize it, so these subsidies that are going to flow to individuals to offset the cost of health care, we're going to issue those only through a state exchange. Only through a state exchange we're going to issue the subsidies, because if we issue the subsidies through a state exchange, then all the states will run to the trough. They'll run and set up these exchanges across the country, and the subsidies will ensure that that will happen. Well, guess what happened? 34 states said no. 34 states said, we're not going to run to the trough. And there was a problem with the administration. They said, what are we going to do about it? And the IRS said, we'll fix it. And so in May of 2012, the IRS passed a rule. And guess what the rule said? Irrespective of whether the state sets up an exchange or not, we're going to issue the subsidies in all 50 states. Period. So, we have a problem. Statute says state exchanges equal subsidies, equal penalties. If there's no state exchange in the statute, there are no subsidies. If there are no subsidies, there are no penalties, which help pay for the subsidies. Oklahoma said no state exchange. The federal government said, we're going to disregard that decision. I'm going to issue the subsidies anyway. We've got a lawsuit. We've got a problem, because Oklahoma made a policy decision that the federal government is trying to change. And so we sued the IRS. And we said, you can't do what you're doing. You don't have the authority to do what you're doing. And we're going to hold you accountable. And we're going to say to you that if you see that as a problem because 34 states said, hey, no exchange, then there's a real easy way to fix that. Go to Congress and fix it. But you can't change it to an administrative rule. And so we're holding accountable. Now, what does that mean to you? I'll tell you what it means to you. Oklahoma's case, our case in Muskogee, Oklahoma, is the point of the spear. If we win in Muskogee, we actually won a motion to dismiss last July. The federal government filed a motion to dismiss our lawsuit. They always do that. We went to Muskogee. We argued the case. Judge White came out and said, Oklahoma can proceed. We won the motion to dismiss. We're now in the midst of the motion for summary judgment that's going to be filed and finalized in May of this year. If we win in May, June of this year in that lawsuit, guess what happens in Oklahoma? Judge White will issue a stay and prevent the IRS from enforcing the penalties in the state of Oklahoma. Will be the only state in the country at that point that will not have to face the wrath of the federal government for the ACA. That's how important the case is. It will set a precedent for the rest of the country. 33 other states will then be able to use that precedent to say, not in our state. It will cause the Affordable Care Act to fall. It will force Congress to go back and repeal it. That's how important the case is. Well, I think you're standing up because I'm supposed to be done. Is that right?
I'm just going to ask you to wrap it up.
Okay.
We've got a presentation.
Okay. So how much time do I have?
A couple minutes.
Couple minutes. All right. It's been good seeing you all. I hope you understand the importance of what we're doing in Oklahoma. We are setting the curve. I didn't get a chance to talk to you about the EPA lawsuit in regional Hagues. We filed a petition with the Supreme Court at the end of last month. It's a case of first impression. I didn't get a chance to talk to you about the Dodd-Frank litigation we got in D.C. Dodd-Frank is as unconstitutional as the Affordable Care Act. It's as bad for banking and finance as healthcare and ACA and healthcare. And Oklahoma is the lead state challenging Dodd-Frank in D.C. today with 10 other states, 11 states. I didn't get a chance to talk to you about sue and settle, where the EPA is encouraging lawsuits to be filed by environmental groups like Wild Earth Guardians and others, as John knows. And a lawsuit will be filed by Wild Earth Guardians. It happened recently. And it's almost like a friendly lawsuit where they'll bring the lawsuit and the EPA will say, you got us, and raise the white flag, and then agree to do things in the settlement that the statute doesn't require. It's called regulation through litigation. And we have the EPA cutting deals with environmental groups and violating due process. Oklahoma's got a lawsuit in Oklahoma City challenging that against the EPA. So we are truly making an impact. It's an honor to serve as your Attorney General. We're going to keep fighting. I pray to see success, and I pray at the end of the day, we see an administration, a president that understands that rule of law means something. There's a term in Latin called, it's Saturday, right? And it's sunny. So when I say this to you, I'm sorry. Lex Rex. I don't mean to be too. Lex Rex. The law is above the king. And in this country, the president doesn't have the authority, he doesn't have the opportunity to disregard the law. He is constrained by it. Let us make sure that we continue that, because it will set up for the future the kind of growth and opportunity that we're going to see as a nation. God bless you on a Saturday. I hope to see you soon.